First, it's Dragon Ball, then it's Z, but then what? Now in all of media, spin-offs, sequels, and sometimes just continuations in general don't really be having the best rep. And with that chip already on your shoulder, when releasing one, you just gotta know. With the fans, it can either go over relatively good or really bad. So with that in mind, let me ask y'all a question. When you think Dragon Ball sequel, and I guess midquels, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it the Tournament of Power, or the drop in story quality, the Shadow Dragon arc, or a good chunk of the show boring you to death, receiving an insane amount of Z lore, or the dragged fan service? No matter which continuation we're talking about, there's something to love and hate with each of them. So today, we're gathering around to answer a very simple question. When it comes to Dragon Ball Z's many sequels, who did it best? Yeah, let's get into it. Now, just as I was gonna make this vid on only Super and GT, Daima dropped. And a good friend of mine was like, you can't do it without including Daima. So, you know, I had to wait and see what they cooked up. And I'm actually happy I did. Although pretty short, I do think it's important to include. You know, especially it being one of, if not the last thing, Akira Toriyama worked on before his untimely passing last year. And trust, I'ma try my best not to let recency bias or even just nostalgia affect things here. But before we get into how I'm doing this, I just want to say I'm only basing this off of what's currently animated for each series. So yeah, that excludes the Granola, Moro, and whatever later arcs in Super. Sorry if that pisses anyone off, but since both GT and Daima don't have mangas, I just think it's best if we keep this anime based. Alright, now that we got that covered, to keep things completely fair, the best way I thought to do this was by category. So I came up with a few. We got transformations, villains, my overall entertainment, story and plot, and relevance to Dragon Ball Z, or just the franchise. Now, as we all know, one of the most prominent things about Dragon Ball Z was for sure the go-to transformations. They were constantly doing their big one. Like, even the villains were stepping. So let's see how or if any of the sequels followed suit. First up is GT. Now, as far as the heroes go, we only get a few. But boy, did they leave a mark. Of course, I'm talking about the Golden Great Ape and Super Saiyan 4. Both of these forms are only achieved by Vegeta and Goku though. Then for Super, we have quite a few. They were really passing transformations out like hotcakes. But remember guys, it's quality over quantity. Anyways, we got introduced to transformations such as Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan Ray, Super Saiyan Blue, Super Saiyan Blue Evolved, Super Saiyan Berserk, Control Super Saiyan, Berserk 1 and 2, and then finally of course Ultra Instinct and Master the UI. Not to mention the ones in the movies. And finally for Daima, the new transformations we were introduced to, well, weren't so new at all. Well, I mean, we got a Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta reveal, which did make me feel good inside. And then we got Super Saiyan 4 finally becoming canon. But not gonna lie, this one is clearly between Super and GT. Okay, so design-wise, I'd 100% give it to GT just for Super Saiyan 4. And clearly Toriyama fucked with it too if he wanted to make it canon. Plus, lots of people feel strongly that Super Saiyan 4 is one of the main things GT actually got right. It's a very beloved form. So it seems clear as day who I should be giving this to, right? Well, let's look a little deeper into this for a second. When you really look at previous peak transformations and what made them so good, it's not the design alone, it's the build-up. The foreshadowing, the music, the actions all leading up to that very moment. All that plus the design and aura is what I think really makes a good transformation. Like, think about Vegeta over obsessing about the legend and running around repeatedly mistaking himself and Goku as Super Saiyans when they indeed weren't.
Bitch, you just jealous of my Super Saiyan swagger.
For f***'s sake.
Or even how long Toriyama spent constantly nudging at Gohan's latent potential.
It is a secret we have known before Gohan could even form words in his mouth. Through fights with Raditz, the Ginyu Force, and even Frieza, we've caught glimpses of the child's explosive power.
So while I do love Super Saiyan 4, and I think it's the best transformation with appearance and possibly aura, plus I did have a little crush on Gogeta, I do feel like it was a little lackluster with the build-ups. Like with Goku's, we knew something was about to happen because that was the whole point of Elder Kai yanking his tail out, but then we have Vegeta using a machine and shit. Yeah, not it. Neither one of these build-ups really gave to me. Not here. Oh, and definitely not in Daima. And I know what you're probably thinking. The form itself has a tail. They're Saiyans. How much more build-up do you really need? I know, I'm being a little nitpicky with this, but I always like the build-up factor certain transformations got. Now you can say, oh, but they low-key foreshadowed it in Z during the Super Saiyan 3 transformation, but no. Build it in your own show. Did Ultra Instinct just fully rely on prior foreshadowing in Z? No, there was some in Z, but they still built on it all through Super. But then, on the other hand, Super had a whole bunch of other transformations that just turned out to be bland, and definitely didn't receive any type of build up, you know, besides the one. So like, damn, first category and I'm already struggling like this. Alright, when it comes to transformations as a whole, I'ma have to give it to GT. Although I do think Super's actual UI transformation was handled a bit better than Super Saiyan 4's, and it does make a very strong case in this, I can't just ignore the many actual bland transformations we got in Super. UI is the only one that had that classic buildup I was talking about, and of course, looked cool while doing it. The other ones that were presented though, are really dragging them down. Plus, I mean, I guess I can forget Super Saiyan 4's lackluster buildups when you got a form that overall just screams Saiyan Origin at you. So while GT only had like 2 transformations, I feel like they made the overall bigger impact, which is crazy because Super had way more opportunity to do so. Not to mention, even the villains had cooler transformations than Super's simple hair color switches. Which actually brings me to our next category. The villains. Yeah, Dragon Ball Z was always notorious for its iconic villains, so let's see what the sequels cooked up, starting with Daima this time. So the main villain of the series is Goma. I found him more so funny than villainy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. He comes across more like some of the OG Dragon Ball villains, you know, like Pilaf. He's supposed to be this really powerful wizard, like even without the evil eye, but they did not showcase that at all. Also, when it comes to his motivation, I kinda ran a little bit because he was fake chirping. His whole thing is not wanting to go out like Deborah or Boo did. So I don't know what possessed him to listen to Arinsu and actually go bother the Z fighters. He literally seen how Deborah got into it with them and then how Boo was defeated. All fights they started, by the way. So if you're trying to avoid that fate at all costs, you decided the best thing to do was basically go pick a fight with them too? Goku and his friends never even been to the demon realm, and I'm sure they had no interest in going there anytime soon. So you would have been Gucci. Instead though, to make sure, he turns everyone into kids and kidnaps Dende. Even the turning everyone into kids part lost me though, because if you're watching all these tapes from the Boo saga, you know even the kids were putting in work. So how can you think turning them into kids is really stopping something? I know he couldn't wish for Shenron to flat out off them, so maybe his first wish was the kid thing and then his next 2 wishes would have accommodated that. But once Shenron dubbed it, his plan fell apart. Yeah, he was all over the place. I don't know what he was trying to do. Anyways, enough about Goma. Let's move on to Super's villains, or should I say villain, because Super doesn't really have actual villains. They more so have antagonists and rivals. Zamasu was the only for real villain we've seen in the anime, and his motivations was something.
For creation!
You seriously crying?
He really just hates mortals, but I can't even say too much about that. Dragon Ball villains don't exactly be having the most thought out plans and motivations. They be so ready to destroy the earth and or universe, and I guess after, just chill by themselves for all of eternity? I don't know. Anyways, Zamasu's plan though, I gotta say was pretty well executed. Steal the strongest mortal's body, get help from someone he knows is gonna be on the same type of timing, in this case himself. Clearly no one else is gonna agree that the mortals they watch over should all die. So, gotta off your peers. But when you off all the Kais, you're indirectly offing all the gods of destructions too. So who's gonna be left to stop you? No one. Then yeah, continue offing mortals. Pretty concrete stuff here. Plus he also technically won. What other villain did they have so much issues with that they literally have to call the god above gods to pack him and the whole universe up? Good ending for the arc? No. But can we ignore how much of a problem you really have to be for that to happen? Also no. Solid villain, enough said. And finally, we have GT's villains, who a lot of them seemed like a good concept on the table, but still fell short in the execution. The most notable villains in GT was definitely Baby and the Shadow Dragons. Now, I love the Shadow Dragon concept. The whole overuse of the Dragon Balls actually backfiring makes perfect sense, and ties all the way back to Dragon Ball itself. Because if you remember, Goku was warned about this from Kami, so seeing something actually unfold, def felt like a good callback. Now, the actual dragons, some of them were cool, some of them were... But the main one, Omega or Sin, whatever he's choosing to go by, looked cool in design but was kinda lackluster. Maybe it was due to his dull personality, I don't know. He came across pretty generic, especially for a final boss type villain. He was def doing them in though. Now Baby, he's definitely GT's best villain. Great motivation, plan and design, wanting to get revenge on the last of the Saiyans for offing his peoples. That ties into the Saiyans' roots, because since we see Frieza being fucked up, we never actually see much of what the Saiyans were doing. People see seem to forget they were ruthless and bloodthirsty. They conquered plenty of planets on their own. The Tuffles were just one of them. I also think he enacted his plan pretty well. You know, the whole use what you hate to defeat the rest. Only thing I remember slightly disliking was that with how close GT was released after Z, it did feel a bit like a micro boo in some aspect. Even the whole using Vegeta as a host again was like,
oh shit. Here we go again.
Besides that though, I think it's a pretty good arc. So which series am I giving best villains to? First, let me say, Goma is entertaining, so he did keep me engaged, but he isn't really a standout villain, at least in my opinion. Like I said before, he reminds me more so of the OG Dragon Ball villains. But after seeing Z and its other sequels, I've seen Goku and just the Z fighters in general go through a lot. Here, there wasn't any moment that made me feel like, oh nah, this villain is really doing them in. Or even a, oh nah, this is a villain. Like, not once did the situation feel super dire. Plus, he was stealing drip. So yeah, this is more so between Super's Zamasu and GT's Baby. I think both are good villains and definitely step up from Z's villains in terms of death. But I'ma give it to GT for Baby. I just think he's just a slightly overall better villain, even though his laugh was super annoying. Alright, some of you may wonder why entertainment gets its own category, but like I've said before on this channel, one of the main reasons I've always watched and rewatched anything Dragon Ball related was always the entertainment factor. I'm a simple girl. I'm here for the fights and the humor aspect. Alright, so right off rip, I gotta say GT drags heavily in the beginning. Like heavily, and it doesn't really pick up until the Baby arc. Also, I checked recently because it really felt like half of GT was boring, but to my surprise it was actually only like 16 or 17 episodes, but it just feels way longer. So that kind of tells you all you need to know. After Baby though, the Super 17 arc but the Shadow Dragon arc made up for it, well, at least for me. The fights range from boring to good with a few standout moments, but there's nothing really over the top. Alright, now Daima is more like OG Dragon Ball, so it's a bit calmer than what I prefer, but it surprisingly didn't bore me. I also didn't watch week by week though. I ended up binging most of it at once. And you know, when you do that, it's way easier to stay engaged, so that could have played a part as well. Now I will say, I wasn't really fond of the whole turning back into a kid thing back when GT did it, so once I seen Daima was doing it too, but to the whole cast now, not gonna lie, I went into this fully expecting not to like it very much. But I was pleasantly surprised to find out that I was wrong on this. I don't know what it is exactly, but them turning into kids here just worked. Maybe it's the fact that it was really driving the plot, you know, them actually wanting and trying to turn back into adults rather than us not even knowing if Goku would ever turn back into an adult. As for the fights though, they're not too flashy or anything. It overall just felt like they were on this fun little adventure, which I didn't mind at all. Next we have Super. Like I said with GT, Super also drags in the beginning because for some reason they decided to dedicate not one but two of its arcs to movies we already seen, but then it does pick up from there on out. The best arcs though are the Goku Black and the Tournament of Power. The Tournament of Power also felt a little dragged in places, but that's really the least when it produces the series' most top tier moments. Oh, and the fights in Super, they're up there. Alright, so entertainment wise, well, one thing for sure, none of these continuations fail to make me laugh, especially Daima. It's pure jokes. So that's like half the goal with me already. But the Shadow Dragon arc is something I actually do rewatch from time to time, and although I fuck with it, even that had boring sections in it. While I didn't rewatch the Tournament of Power nearly as much as I did that arc, I feel like it definitely had the hyper moments. But then again, Daima was real smart. It kept things short, sweet, and to the point. They didn't bore me at all. Man, decisions. Daima had me the most consistently engaged, but not gonna lie, Super for sure gave the most entertainment. I love to laugh, but I'ma forever remember the goosebumps I got watching Goku get UI for the first time. Yeah, Super is taking this one. I don't think either sequel is really beating those trumpets. Up next, we got story and plot. Now, although people like to play and say Dragon Ball Z itself had no plot, it did. Now, it may have been a simple one, but like I've always said, that was the point. And all the sequels followed that same formula, or at least try to. There's a lot of good and bad when it comes to each series' writing. So starting with Super, well, I can't cap, their shit was all over the place. And it would take way too long to go over every single thing wrong writing wise. So I think it's actually easier to just read off these lists I made up of each show's good and bad. Getting the bad out the way first, we got terrible pacing, Goku's character assassination, Piccolo's death,
Power levels are bullshit!
Goku Black arc's ending, not letting Boo fight in the Tournament of Power, too many bland transformations, nostalgia baiting / fan service. And the good, we got the build up to the UI transformation, Zamasu's depth, lots of characters utilized, good world building, Goku and Vegeta's healthy rivalry, Vegeta only progressing instead of regressing from his previous character development. Moving on to GT, man, I remember back when I first ever watched GT, how bad people used to shit on it. But as years went by, I noticed a little shift. People aren't being as harsh with it anymore. It definitely doesn't stand close to the OG or Dragon Ball Z, but when you put it beside the other sequels or midicals, the writing's not looking all too shabby now, huh? Nah, I can't lie, in terms of writing, it's lacking almost just as much as Super, just in different ways. So let's look at its list now. So the bad would be 2 Goku Central / side characters aren't utilized, Pan lacks character development, failed at giving the OG Dragon Ball feel, characters not acting like themselves, pacing can be extremely slow, good concepts but poor execution. And then for the good, it's unique story concepts, Piccolo's death done well this time, Baby as a villain, manages to capture that Z feel, best ending in the franchise. And finally we have Daima. It for sure has the advantage here with its length. Yo, but can't lie, first episode in, I immediately said to my friend how it low-key felt like a Xenoverse game plot coming to life. And it's just funny to see I'm not the only one who peeped that. Anyways, for the bad, we got contradicts Super multiple times, no build up to transformations, nostalgic fan service, doesn't utilize sad characters enough, underwhelming ending. The good, answers Z related questions, good pacing, new Demon World lore, offers plot twist, nailed the Z formula with a simple but effective plot, succeeds in using the kid angle, succeeds in giving OG Dragon Ball feel. Alright, this was like the hardest category because there's really major plot and story issues with all 3 that really make me wanna... I'm actually leaning towards Daima for this. And I know there's a lot of contradictions with it. Trust, I plan on making a whole separate vid just on that. But even with that, I do think compared to the other 2, it's consistently the best written here. Plus it has the shortest bad list. You gotta think about it though, Daima also had the advantage of time. They really got to see what worked and what didn't for past projects. It's definitely combining things from GT, Super, the game, Dragon Ball, and even Z to make a whole new story. Plus, I'm probably part of the low % of people who actually love the Buu saga, but anything that gives me more lore on that, I'm all for. So yeah, Daima got it. Alright, last but not least, relevance to Z or just a franchise. You may be wondering, what does this have to do with anything? But when making a sequel or a continuation, this is actually a crucial part. So let's see how each series went about this. Alright, so each series actually brings relevance to Dragon Ball Z or the franchise in their own way. With GT, it's a bit at a disadvantage, you know, with it being non-canon and all. But at the same time, since it's the oldest, which means it started way closer to when Z originally ended, I would say it carries a lot more of that Z feeling than the other 2, which I know may be crazy to hear. I know a lot of people feel the total opposite, but hear me out. The people from Toei who made Dragon Ball GT were already working on Z for years by that point, especially the filler in most of the movies. That's them. So the fact they've had plenty of experience with the previous show and that they released back in 1997 directly after Z's end contributes greatly to it still somewhat having that Z feel. And although there's plenty of times they show they don't understand characters or even what made certain things so iconic, with multiple plot points they do still show how they did overall understand the Dragon Ball franchise, hence the trying to bring adventure back in, connecting multiple things back to the Saiyans roots. Even the 4-star of Dragon Ball still carrying meaning. So it's like, I know they didn't receive 10 years of training from Toriyama himself like his successor did, but damn, cut them some slack. But let's move on. Super does a great job on building on the very foundation and world building Z previously laid out. Like in Z, the higher ups we kept getting introduced to kept getting higher and higher as the series continued. First it was Kami, King Kai, Grand Kai, Supreme Kai. So can't lie, bringing in Beerus and Whis and the Omni King felt pretty natural and works great for a Dragon Ball Z continuation. Also, things like learning that Bulma and Vegeta both have siblings and that there's not only other universes but Saiyans in one of them was pretty cool to unpack as a fan of the previous show. Also, getting new lore def made me think back on certain things, like all the times Beerus technically almost got packed up, for instance. The fights are also a huge aspect when thinking about the Dragon Ball franchise, and I feel like Super knows this and doesn't disappoint in that aspect. In my opinion, the Goku vs Jiren fight was the closest thing we got to experiencing a classic Z fight again, and the hype around it at the time was unreal. Like, you just had to be there. So as long as new transformations and fights keep coming, the series itself is gonna stay plenty relevant to Z, and I'd say the whole franchise. And finally, the newest one here, Daima. Now with Daima, it really feels like we pretty much picked up right where we left off after Boo was defeated. And I don't mean just because that's where the story is placed, I mean with the characters as well. I feel like characters that were acting a little off in GT or Super feel more like themselves here. I said it during the last category, but Daima also feels super relevant to Z because besides receiving so much new lore from a place that was mentioned, but we didn't get to see in Z's last arc, it also answers questions and confirms things that fans have been wondering for years. Namekians are in fact demons. Rimus created the universe. Pointing ears most likely equals demon realm. Then while learning all this new info that ties back to Z, Daima switches gears from Z and takes on an OG Dragon Ball approach with the overall plot, adding more adventure and not so serious fights. And I for one think they did it well, especially since we've seen GT attempt this but fail at doing it, which makes sense since Toriyama himself was heavily involved this time around. It just had a certain charm to it. Anyways, I think I yapped enough for this one. I'll cut to the chase and just say, as of right now, Daima holds the most relevance to Z and really the entire franchise. Their world building and Z lore got super beat in my opinion. So, as you can see, GT and Daima are tied now. This is low-key harder than I thought it would be, because on one hand it's like, while Daima has its flaws, like the continuity issues arising, or even the random transformations, the other sequels have these issues too, plus more. It's shorter, yeah, but it got the Dragon Ball aspect right. Plenty of interesting lore, decent to good fights, but while that is all true, Daima to me just doesn't feel original enough to stand on its own. Don't get me wrong, I love how much it relates to the franchise, but as its own show, of course you're gonna borrow certain things from the previous show, but you're still supposed to do your own thing. The other continuations at least try to bring something new and fresh to the table. Daima more so slapped us with nostalgic fan service, but I am a fan, so I'm not all the way mad at it. And it would be totally fine if this was just a 40th anniversary special, like I originally thought. But it later got cleared up that it's in fact not, even though it feels like it. So I have to judge it as a standard continuation like the rest. Don't get me wrong, it's a cool little side quest, but lately I've been seeing people immediately put it over the other contender, and it's not sitting right with me. So based on the categories and what I know feels the most like a Dragon Ball Z continuation, although there are plenty of flaws with it, I'm picking GT. I personally feel like GT was never as bad as people made it, and I've always defended it because there were certain factors I really loved. And it can't be that ass if both sequels are implementing multiple things from it in their show. We got sequels copying sequels, sometimes doing it better, but mostly doing it worse. I honestly think GT got so much flack since it was the first sequel since Z ended, and because Toriyama wasn't really involved. That's two major things working against it, but I'm stamping it. As of right now, of what's currently animated, GT holds up the best as a Dragon Ball Z sequel. But hey, no matter which one you're watching, if you're a fan, there's really something for everyone with all these continuations, from manga to the different anime. So I suggest giving all of them a chance. In the comments, let me know which sequel you think hit the mark the most. And if you're choosing to be Mickey and plead the fifth, I guess you can still let me know the one you prefer the most, regardless of any of the categories. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'm gonna leave y'all with this.
That just goes to show you no matter how much a monkey evolves, it's still a monkey. How is your father?
What? Dad, what has come over you?
I've entered your body once before and I'll do it again.
I'll just do what you do.
Ow. What the heck? Fool Kakarot, spit it out!
Don't worry.
You could have been killed, moron!